Good Country People by Flannery O'Connor. Besides the neutral expression that she wore when she was alone, Miss Freeman had two others, forward and reverse, that she used for all her human dealings. Her forward expression was steady and driving, like the advance of a heavy truck. Her eyes never swerved to left or right, but turned as the story turned, as if they followed a yellow line down the center of it. She seldom used the other expression. It was not often necessary for her to retract a statement, but when she did, her face came to a complete stop. There was an almost imperceptible movement of her black eyes, during which they seemed to be receding, and then the observer would see that Miss Freeman, though she might stand there as real as several grain sacks thrown on top of each other, was no longer there in spirit. As for getting anything across to her when this was the case, Miss Hopeful had given it up. She might talk her head off. Miss Freeman could never be brought to admit herself wrong on any point. She would stand there, and if she could be brought to say anything, it was something like, "Well, I wouldn't have said it was, and I wouldn't have said it wasn't." Or, letting her gaze range over the top kitchen shelf, where there was an assortment of dusty bottles, she might remark, "I see you ain't ate many of them figs you put up last summer." They carried on their most important business in the kitchen at breakfast. Every morning Miss Hopewell got up at 7 o'clock and lit her gas heater and Joy's. Joy was her daughter, a large blonde girl who had an artificial leg. Miss Hopewell thought of her as a child, though she was 32 years old, and highly educated. Joy would get up while her mother was eating and lumber into the bathroom and slam the door, and before long Miss Freeman would arrive at the back door. Joy would hear her mother call, "Come on in," and then they would talk a while in low voices that were indistinguishable in the bathroom. By the time Joy came in, they usually finished the weather report and were on one or the other of Miss Freeman's daughters, Glenise and Caramel. Joy called them Glycerin and Caramel. Glenise, a redhead, was 18 and had many admirers. Caramel, a blonde, was only 15, but already married and pregnant. She could not keep anything on her stomach. Every morning Miss Freeman told Miss Hopewell how many times she had vomited since her last report. Miss Hopewell liked to tell people that Glenise and Caramel were two of the finest girls she ever knew, and that Miss Freeman was a lady, and that she was never ashamed to take her anywhere or introduce her to anybody they might meet. Then she would tell how she had happened to hire the Freemans in the first place, and how they were a godsend to her, and how she had had them for 4 years. The reason for her keeping them so long was that they were not trash. They were good country people. She had telephoned the man whose name they had given as a reference, and he had told her that Mr. Freeman was a good farmer, but that his wife was the nosiest woman ever to walk the earth. "She's got to be into everything," the man said. "If she don't get there before the dust settles, you can bet she's dead, that's all. She'll want to know all your business. I can stand him real good," he had said, "but me nor my wife, neither could have stood that woman one more minute on this place." That had put Miss Hopewell off for a few days. She had hired them in the end because there were no other applicants, but she had made up her mind beforehand exactly how she would handle the woman. Since she was the type who had to be into everything, then Miss Hopewell had decided she would not only let her be into everything, she would see to it that she was into everything. She would give her the responsibility of everything. She would put her in charge. Miss Hopewell had no bad qualities of her own, but she was able to use other people's in such a constructive way that she never felt the lack. She had hired the Freemans, and she had kept them 4 years. "Nothing is perfect." This was one of Miss Hopewell's favorite sayings. Another was, "That is life," and still another, the most important, was, "Well, other people have their opinions too." She would make these statements, usually at the table, in a tone of gentle insistence, as if no one held them but her, and the large hulking Joy, whose constant outrage had obliterated every expression from her face, would stare just a little to the side of her icy eyes blue, with the look of someone who has achieved blindness by an act of will and means to keep it. When Miss Hopewell said to Miss Freeman that life was like that, Miss Freeman would say, "I always said to myself," nothing had been arrived at by anyone that had not first been arrived at by her. She was quicker than Mr. Freeman. When Miss Hopewell said to her, after they had been on the place a while, "You know, you're the wheel behind the wheel," and winked, Miss Freeman had said, "I know it. I've always been quick. It's some that are quicker than others." "Everybody is different," Miss Hopewell said. "Yep, most people is," Miss Freeman said. "It takes all kinds to make the world. I always said it did myself." The girl was used to this kind of dialogue for breakfast, and more of it for dinner. Sometimes they had it for supper, too. When they had no guests, they ate in the kitchen because that was easier. Miss Freeman always managed to arrive at some point during the meal and to watch them finish it. She would stand in the doorway if it were summer, but in the winter she would stand with one elbow on top of the refrigerator and look down on them. Or she would stand by the gas heater, lifting the back of her skirt slightly. Occasionally would stand against the wall and roll her head from side to side. At no time was she in any hurry to leave. All this was very trying on Miss Hopewell, but she was a woman of great patience. She realized that nothing is perfect, and that in the Freemans she had good country people, and that if, in this day and age, you get good country people, you had better hang on to them. She had had plenty of experience with trash. Before the Freemans, she had averaged one tenant family a year. The wives of these farmers were not the kind you would want to be around you for long. Miss Hopewell, who had divorced her husband long ago, needed someone to walk over the fields with her, and when Joy had to be impressed for these services, her remarks were usually so ugly, and her face so glum, that Miss Hopewell would say, "If you can't come pleasantly, I don't want you at all," to which the girl, standing square and rigid-shouldered, with her neck thrust slightly forward, would reply, "If you want me, here I am, like I am." Miss Hopewell excused this attitude because of the leg, which had been shot off in a hunting accident when Joy was 10. It was hard for Miss Hopewell to realize that her child was 32 now, and that for more than 20 years she had had only one leg. She thought of her still as a child, because it tore her heart to think instead of the poor stout girl in her 30s, who had never danced a step, or who had any normal good times. Her name was really Joy, but as soon as she was 21 and away from home, she had had it legally changed. Miss Hopewell was certain that she had thought and thought until she had hit upon the ugliest name in any language. Then she had gone and had the beautiful name Joy changed without telling her mother, until after she had done it. Her legal name was Helga. This is the end of part 1 of 7.